My name is Purnell. I was born in High Springs, Florida in 1929. My dad was born, I believe, in West Florida, and my mother was born in High Springs, Florida, and she was known well in Alachua County.
My name is William Purnell. They call me Bill, and I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Well, I have two brothers. Well, one brother passed away, and my other two sisters also, they're deceased at this time. And I lived in Philadelphia for 1 year, and then we moved to Cape May, New Jersey. And then my father was born in Camden, New Jersey. My mother was born in Cambridge, Maryland. My father, he lived for a while in Camden, and then he moved to Springtown, New Jersey, and then he went into the service for a total of 9 years.
My experience being born in America wasn't really bad or anything. It was what I would call normal, because I was supposed the youngest child, and my mother and father had separated, and we lived in a segregated neighborhood, and we walked nearly everywhere we went because there was nothing very far away. And I had friends, and you know, we had fun. We just lived a normal life. My friends, my best friend lived not too far away, was Beatrice, and there were times she couldn't come out to play because she had asthma. And that was a sad time, but we always had a lot of fun. And then I had another friend that lived down the street, Joyce. She a lot of times had to help with her grandmother. Then I had another friend that lived across the railroad track, and I would go see her once in a while, but it wasn't very far. But like I said, we walked just about everywhere we went. My uncle, at times, 1 year he had planted tobacco, and when it was ready to harvest, and they considered it being ripe, they would bring in tobacco from the field and lay it on tables, and I was able to help. That was kind of fun. So I enjoyed things like that.
When I was very young, I had a chance to play with a lot of the children, and we moved a lot. We lived in Cape May, New Jersey, and that's a seashore town. And there, where we lived in the area where it was mixed with black and white. And often when I was a very young child, I played with my white friends. And I had one white friend in particular that had a kiddie car. And I used to go over to his house, and he gave me the opportunity to play with his kiddie car. As I grew a little older, and I also had a white friend, his name was Joe. And we lived on the same street that I lived on, and we used to shoot marbles. And then as I got a little older and I went to high school, I did have one experience there at high school in which there was a little confrontation between the black students and the white students when the drama team, which was all white, had put on a minstrel show, and they had an assembly. And all of the black students in the school protested against it because the students had all painted their faces black and they painted their lips white, and some of the students ran up and down the hallway and they made racial type slurs. And the principal had us all go into, all of the black students, just go into one room that didn't want to go to the assembly. And we felt that he should have canceled it, but he didn't. And so that was my really first encounter in having some type of confrontation, say, with black and white, because prior to that, I'd always had a very good relationship with all races. So that's how I was brought up when I was young. I was sitting in the house one day, and someone knocked on the door, and it was the athletic director of Shaw University, and he said, we are going to be giving scholarships, you know, to football players, and you've been recommended to come to Shaw to play football. And he said it would be a full scholarship. So I took advantage of that, and I was able to go to Shaw University for the 4 years on a scholarship. A little later on, I found out that it was a man that was a teacher in right near Raleigh, North Carolina, and he had seen me play, and he was the one that had recommended me to go to school. And while I was at Shaw University, my last year, I had to do practice teaching, and I was able to do the practice teaching at the same school that this gentleman was the principal of. And that was, I thought, very interesting. My degree was in physical education, so I was able to complete Shaw University and then go to the University of Pennsylvania and then continue with my studies in physical therapy. After the University of Pennsylvania, I had received a notice to report to the service because we were then in the midst of the Korean War. So I was able to get a deferment so that I could complete college. And then as soon as I was able to complete at the University of Pennsylvania, then I had to go to Korea, and I was there for 2 years. And that's another story. I had trained at Fort Dix, New Jersey, when I first went into the Army. And I was there for 8 weeks. So I trained as a wireman. And when I was in Korea, we had to attach the wires from what we call the company rear to the outpost. And the outpost was an area there where they were shooting the mortars over from one hill, which would be our hills that we had occupied, over to the hills that the communists and the North Koreans were occupying. While we were attaching wires that had been exploded and dismantled by the enemy mortars, often we would have to go into an area called no man's land, and it would be very dark. And so I was driving the Jeep, and I had a friend, which was white, by the way, and he was from Ohio. And I couldn't see where I was going because we weren't allowed to use any lights at all when we were in the no man's land, and it would be very dark. Mitch, that was his name, and he was able to see in the dark. And I come to find out, he told me, he said, I could see in the dark because I used to go out and shoot rabbits and different things when he was living in Ohio, and he used to go out at night. So when the shells and whatnot were coming over, and he was able to steer us properly on the roads so that we didn't run over and crash our Jeep or be hit by the shells that were coming over, exploding all around us. And I always remember that Mitch was the one that saved my life. So one day when we were going to this hotel, there was the lady came out and brought us the lunch, and then she brought someone else with her, and it was Christine. But you know what? I also saw Christine when we were one time in the evening when I went to a community center, and the sister brought her there. And when I saw her, this was the first time I actually saw her. And I said to myself, I said, wow, I said, she looks like she's about my age. And then, so I used to go and visit her at the hotel and take her for walks on the boardwalk and different places. We'd go to the movies, and we used to have a lot of fun together. And then I went back to college. When I went to the University of Pennsylvania, I was in physical therapy school, and I was doing some training and also going to school there at the same time at a hospital called the Graduate Hospital. Well, Christine and I sort of separated a little bit during that period of time prior to that. And I was on the elevator, and I was going up in the elevator, and I had on my white uniform, and then wouldn't you know that somebody got on the elevator and she had on her white uniform, and we looked at each other and we realized, we knew each other, so we got a chance to talk to each other again. And then she gave me her telephone number, and I called her, and then I used to visit with her. And that was just prior to the time that I went into the service. So I went into the service, and then she would communicate with me in the service. And before I went into the service, I asked Christine, I said, Christine, will you marry me? And she said, no, you're going in the service, and maybe, when you come out. So I went into the service, and then when I came out, then we got married. And that was in 1953.
Well, one is my sister, because she was the oldest in the family, and she couldn't really attend school like she wanted to and could have because of the way she had to assist my mother with, with our care. And she was always kind and dependable and loving and helpful, and I always admired her. That is how I met Bill, going to work in the summer in Cape May, because my sister had worked there several summers. And that was a lot of fun, and she really did influence my life. And people that were in the limelight was Marian Anderson, the singer, and also Ethel Waters. I always liked her singing. And one of the favorite songs was He's All That I Need. And they still play it now once in a while. And it's a very touching song. And you think of your Lord and what He does for you, what He has done for me, and He's all that I need. So I always enjoy when I hear her sing that.
But my greatest hero was my father, and my father was born in 1884, and he spent 4 years in the Navy, and also 5 years in the Army. In those days, especially back then, during World War I time, it was a person that had been in the service, especially a black person that had been in the service. They were really recognized very highly. And he was always invited to our elementary school to speak about his time that he had spent in the service. So he really was my hero, because I found out after doing some research that he was in the Army from 1915 to 1920, and he was a part of the 25th Infantry, which is also a regiment that was part of the 10th Cavalry. He had that name that they called some of the soldiers at that time, a Buffalo Soldier. So he was a Buffalo Soldier. The 10th Cavalry was always a so-called white cavalry, and the 25th Infantry and also the 24th Infantry eventually became part of the 10th Cavalry, and my father was part of that. He had participated in the war against Mexico, and when the Mexicans had tried to invade the United States, and they were Pancho Villa, I guess some think of him as a bandit. That's what they used to call him back in those days. And but he had raided into the United States, and the 25th regiment that my father was part of, he was part of Company F. They chased him from the United States back into Mexico again, and I thought that was quite interesting.
Christine, what comes to mind when I say William Purnell?
My husband, my dear husband.
Bill, when I say Christine, what do you think?
My best friend. Christine has always been my best friend, and I look forward to her continuing to be my best friend. We've been married for 60 years, and she's always been my friend.